Live.
And we're live. Welcome to the Cackling Carnaruim Consortium of cardboard concoction content creators, because everything had to start with the letter C, and it's Dr. Seuss. Oh, cool. yeah. Let me mute that. There we go. Got you. All right. So tonight we are going to talk about the new Mulligan proposed rule for GP London. I'm sorry, MF London, and we're going to be joined by three special guests. First is Jason Stoops. Tell us about yourself, where you're from, what you do, all that good stuff.
Well, I'm Jason. I do Magic Arena content on the Ether Hub. I hang out with Simon. We talk back and forth, make some cool deck techs and stuff now. I live in West Virginia. Yeah, I was working with MTG Deck Techs. I still kind of am. But mainly what I do now is on the Ether Hub.
Jay, your audio.
Oh no, is it messed up again?
And now it's live forever. Oh, perhaps you can do it in interpretive dance.
T1 Glistener Elf.
There you go. Got there. All righty. So tell us about the YouTube channel. What you up to?
Oh, me this time?
Yeah, we'll go right to you.
All right, cool. Why not? All right. T1 Glistener Elf, Infect all the way. It's mostly just gameplay, paper gameplay content, and occasionally meme videos and other video games as well. And I'm a video editor, so need somebody, just give me a call.
All right. There we go.
Not that anybody heard that because audio issues, but
I think we've got someone in chat. We have a human in chat. We've got myself and one other person. So that's Cardboard Paladin can tell us how that went. And then last but not least, Pappy Pauper. Tell our fan, what's it all about?
Thanks, Johnny. Call me Dave. I'm a father, and we play Pauper. It's good for the budget when you've got lots of kids. And don't have to worry about rotations. YouTube and social media all have the same branded handle, Pappy Pauper.
All right. So this episode of Cackling Carnaruim, we're focusing on this proposed Mulligan rule, and we're gonna go around the table, talk about the given. We have four basic baseline formats we're dealing with. Jason will be dealing with standard and arena. Jay is going to be focusing more on modern legacy. Pappy is on, naturally, Pauper. And I'll be discussing EDH. So for those of you who may not have heard, and I'm sure many of you have, the new proposed Mulligan rule is going to be tested out at MF London. And the way the rule actually works, oh, Jay, it sounds like a jetliner over there.
You're hearing the computer's fan, I think.
Oh, that's the fan? Okay. Gotta get a muffler for that. So we're talking about, so the Mulligan rule is set up like this. Originally, for the last couple of years, since I think 2015, we've been doing the Vancouver Mulligan, where every time you mull down one, you get the scry one. So just like if you mull to 6, 5, whatever, down to 1, you only get the scry 1, but you still get the scry. The idea was to try and make it so it wasn't so much bad beats when you lost, but you had some kind of agency over what you were doing. The new proposed rule is every time you mulligan, you draw 7, but you have to put 1 card for each card you each time you mulligan on the bottom of the library. So we're gonna start off with general impressions. There's that fan. Oh, this is perfect. This is perfect.
Okay, little bit of background. I found out that my previous headset, I don't even know if you can hear me, my previous headset was not working, and I had to run to the store quickly and grab another one, and there's only one port for the headset in my computer, and there are 2 cables, and one is for the headset and the other is for the microphone. So,
you need a switchboard operator.
Yo, that's an idea. That's an idea.
Oh my god! Oh, this is magical. Thank you, Jay. This is the best. So, all right.
I'm so sorry, chat. I'm so sorry.
We'll try it out like this. So, okay, we're gonna keep going. We're gonna power through this like a Learjet. We're gonna get there. All right. So, the way we're doing this, it's basically you get this new Mulligan rule where they're going to try a GP London. They're going to do it in a modern format, which is they want to see if they're going to break an eternal format. And rather than throw it at a turn 1 format like Legacy or Vintage, you get a turn 4 format. And that way they want to probably see if they're going to break things or not. Me personally, just for general impressions, we'll start with general impressions of what we thought of this. I am okay with this. I know a lot of people were kind of like quick to be like, this is terrible, this is going to break things. And the first thing I heard about were ley lines are going to just ruin everything, especially in Modern. And for me, generally, I didn't think it was going to be that bad. I think it was personally, you get this Mulligan option, you draw 7, and you ship the garbage to the bottom of the deck. And honestly, I think that was really, I don't know, I like that. So why don't we go to Jason? What do you think?
So my initial impression of the Mulligan role was like I thought it's gonna impact the more eternal formats more like Modern Legacy. I think it actually helps out Limited a lot because like in Limited, like when you lose cards with a Mulligan, you go down to 6 and you're on like the play. That's kind of devastating. And like overall, I think the rule is actually really good because like you have more of an agency of what you're going to draw. Like so, like when you mulligan to 6, you don't have the information of that one card that's on top of your library. So, like, say you're playing like a mono blue in standard, and like you have a 1-lander, and you don't have a 1-drop creature, but that 7th card that's on top of your library is Mistcloak Herald, and like you would have that in your opening hand. Then it produces more of like it produces more less non-games to me. So like I really enjoy it. I really think it's going to be a good thing.
All right. And Jay, let's go to you. No mic. There's no mic.
God, why?
No mic.
Okay. Is that better?
There you are.
Okay. It doesn't sound like a jetliner.
No, it doesn't. I think it waits until you're not talking.
Of course. Breaking my heart. All right. There's a lot of context that has to be built into something like Modern and Legacy and Vintage when we talk about this, because there are a lot more factors that go into it. I'll give you a longer explanation when the time comes, but the TLDR is it breaks these formats. But there's an article by Patrick Chapin that goes into some detail about the kinds of interactions that you can expect to be more substantial going forward. More linear combo-oriented decks are going to disproportionately benefit from this. And that's not as bad in a format like Standard, where the pool stays at about the same size. There's a limited range for how large it can get. And Standard is the format that R&D cares about the most, so they tailor it the most. There are already, even if no more cards get added, some cards in Modern and Legacy and Vintage that will break them wide open. So when it comes back around to my turn, we can delve into that a little bit.
All right. And Pappy, let's talk about what are your initial impressions of this Mulligan rule?
Initially, I thought it was a pretty neat idea. I thought above everything, and I kind of led with this early on, I think it's going to fundamentally destroy what we see at our local gaming stores and at tournaments. And by destroy, I mean this in a good way. Now we have an opportunity to have new players sit down at the table and avoid frustrations over mana flooding or not getting the right lands when they need it. People will get to play their decks. Much like Jay had said, though, the ability to build on combinations or to dig into combinations as a Pauper player, I'm looking at you, Tron. It makes Tron ridiculously easier to assemble. There's some judgment I reserve. Just getting Tron in and of itself, the 3 Tron lands, meh. What does Tron need those lands for? There's more to talk about, but my initial impressions were I was excited to see what it would do, and I'm confident that it will remove a barrier to entry for newer players to finally get to play their decks just like the pros.
All right. So I think that brings up talking Tron now. That kind of brings us up to another piece I wanted you guys to think about before we got into this. We want to talk about what decks are the winners and losers when it comes to this setup. So why don't we let's go back around to Jason. Why don't you tell us about standard? Which decks do you think are going to be thriving on this? Which ones are going to get nerfed on this?
So I don't think anything's necessarily going to get nerfed in standard. Like, standard's going to have the lowest impact from this. I think your more aggressive decks are going to get a little bit better, but like overall, every deck is kind of going to like get helped a bit. But like, still, like in a control shell, like you want to have as many cards as possible. Yeah, you can like check out, you know, the cards that you're going to put on the bottom. Like you can tailor make your like 6 or 5 card hand, but you still only have 6 or 5 cards. So it's not really helping that a lot. But like your more aggressive decks, you get to make it so that you can like, you might be able to put like your 4-drop on the bottom of your library and keep your 1-drops, your 2-drops, stuff like that. So it's going to help aggressive decks. Also, I really think it's going to help the Nexus deck. It's like they can sculpt the hand that they need. So like it's kind of going to put Nexus up on a like back to the tier that it is. Like, I think a little bit higher than what it is. I'm thinking Arena, where it was banned in best of 1, but like it's going to be like in paper, it's still going to be a force to be reckoned with. And I think that Nexus and like the more aggressive decks, like mono red, mono white, mono blue, that kind of stuff, I think it helps those decks out more than any other one.
All right. And Jay, how about you?
There is a card. It is a 3-mana artifact. It's called Serum Powder. It taps for 1 mana, 1 colorless, 1 generic mana, but that's not the part we care about at all. It also has a little rule that if it's in your opening hand, if you would mulligan, you may reveal the hand. If it has Serum Powder, exile all the cards from that hand and draw that many cards again. It's a free mulligan. And the way that that used to work is, let's say I'm playing a deck, I draw my 7, there's no Serum Powder. What is this garbage hand? I'm going to mulligan. I'll go to 6. Okay, so you draw 6, there's a Serum Powder in here. Okay, I don't like this, so I'll exile them and draw another 6. And then you keep it in scry, Vancouver mulligan. The way that it works with this new interaction, with this new mulligan, is this. I will take that same initial 7, no Serum Powder. I hate this hand. I'm mulliganing. I will draw 7 again because we're under this new mulligan rule. I see a Serum Powder. Well, I have 7 cards in my hand. I may now exile all 7 of them and draw 7 again. And that mulligan will not count. The Serum Powder mulligan will not count to make me go down to 5 the next time. I will only go to 6. It makes Serum Powder a much better card. Now, if this is the first time you've ever heard of that card, you may get a distinct impression for what that's for. You don't exactly put that in your Jund, your Obzon, your Junk. You don't put that in your fair mid-range decks. You put that in your hyper-degenerate combo decks that want to play that. That is a card that is, I believe, a rare, if I remember correctly. It's a Mirrodin block card that is modern, that is legacy, that is vintage. To give the most extreme example, the one that made its rounds on Twitter, I think half jokingly, but half serious, there is a deck in vintage called Dredge. It is a nightmare to play against because it has a 1-card engine called Bazaar of Baghdad. It's a land that does absolutely jack all when it comes to making mana. It does not. Instead, you tap it, draw 2 cards, discard 3 cards. And since you drew a card for that turn, it's supposed to keep you even. Draw 3, discard 3. In Dredge, that reads, draw 12 cards, discard 2 Golgari Grave Trolls and a Dread return. And if that's a little broken, that's because it is. Now, if you only have 4 copies in your deck, you have just under a 40% chance to see it in your opening 7. And so you run 4 Serum Powders, because if you have a Serum Powder and you don't have a Bazaar, you have to mulligan that. Actually, if you don't have a Bazaar, you have to mulligan, period. any deck that's looking for these bullet cards like that is going to become more powerful. To give another example, no one plays. I love Vintage, but no one plays Vintage. Moving to, say, Legacy. If you're familiar with ley lines, it needs one land as well. It needs Serra Sanctum. It makes white mana for every enchantment you have on the field. It's called ley lines for a reason. It plays a bunch of ley lines and this thing, and it can win as soon as the first turn. But you can't really keep a hand unless you have Serra Sanctum or way to get it. Serum Powder comes in, lets you exile awful hands and go at it again. I've just been talking about, there's a modern deck that uses Serum Powder. It's called Serum Powder Eldrazi. There's a 3-mana Eldrazi that can come back into play from exile. You can cast it from exile.
Right.
And that is this eternal engine of value. Serum Powder gets busted under this rule. If it actually is adopted more permanently, congratulations on your investment in what used to be a fairly bulk rare. It is now worth something. It is now worth a bit. That's just on Serum Powder. That's just on one card.
Oh, the demons are back. Yeah, I think Paladin said it right. You got demons in your computer.
I don't want to filibuster, so I'll pass it over to Pappy, but bring it back in a bit.
Okay.
Well, Serum Powder currently is about $2. It's a rare, but I could certainly see it going up in price. Also important to watch are Devoted Druid and Vizier of Remedies. It's going to allow even modern combos to explode and build upon themselves at an accelerated rate. Just looking hypergeometrically, running the calculations, if you had a full play set of just 2 cards that you need to pull off whatever combo, with the new Mulligan rule, you have a 60% chance of getting those 2. Now, you'll have to make some sacrifices and lose other things, and that's presuming that mana acceleration was not one of those things that you need. So there are other factors going in. How will this apply to Pauper? I don't think anyone really pays attention to Pauper. If we saw Alex Ullman and Kendra Smith put out fantastic research about the need to ban Gush, or at least strongly consider banning Gush in the Pauper format, and it gets glanced over with a simple, we'll think about it, from Wizards of the Coast back, a month ago now. I can't think that anyone's really going to put more effort, knowing Wizards of the Coast's track history on building predictions of the future formats. I don't think they're going to retroactively consider Pauper. So in some ways, I think that format is safe. What I will kind of wonder about is the health of Standard. While this combination is no longer in play, it wasn't so long ago Saheeli Rai and Felidar Guardian were there, and that would have busted Standard using the new London Mulligan. Being able to get that in your opening hand, that's game. That's game. And that would cause greater frustration among players, not because the combination would be annoying, just because it would be consistently annoying. Everyone would be playing it, and it becomes a game of legacy. Flip a coin, who goes first? That's your winner. So I'm really asking Wizards of the Coast to be more mindful of their, what was it, they call it the Future League, where they had lots of play testers anticipating the challenges and given Standard format and repercussions perhaps elsewhere. I'm not very confident that they will see how future cards may interact, and the London Mulligan will exploit those weaknesses Wizards may overlook.
So I think going into looking at EDH, I think EDH has a more of a wild card effect that we might see based on the jet engines and the demons. Sorry, Jay. The background noise is messing me up. Hang on.
It's like a dot matrix printer.
Can anyone else hear it, or am I the only one that can't hear it?
No, I heard it. It sounds like I said, a dot matrix printer.
That's me. All right. Now let me. How do I end? We're live. There it is. Okay. So, as far as EDH goes,
myself to try to cut that off. I'm sorry.
Okay. That system was actually works. If you can still hear us when it's mute, and then come back when it's that would help. Okay. Cool. All right. So, when it comes to EDH, I think it depends on what the play group is. Because it's not a competitive tournament format, it's going to be managed by the players playing in that format. So really, it's very self-regulated. I think if you're getting into competitive EDH or 1v1, it can get busted for a lot of the same reasons that were mentioned for this, in the case of Modern and Legacy. But even then, you're talking about 100-card singleton. It's a lot harder to abuse, even if the deck is half combo. Your odds, I don't know what the percentages would be, but I still don't feel like it's going to be that broken when it comes to that particular format. Now, we have brought up for the other formats that might have problems is the fact that there's more consistency in these combos. Now, if we're talking about a tournament setting, if we're talking about an actual best of 3, where that first game, when someone's mulling down to that combo, we're going to see people digging for what they want. And then in game 2, the opponent has all the information they need on that. So the next question I would ask is, what do you think this does to sideboards? What do you think this does to actually what happens in the game? First game you can play, I gotcha. But now that they know what you're running, do you think sideboarding becomes any more critical? Does it become more predictable? Do you think this might streamline sideboards if the meta gets super degenerate and we see nothing but, say, ley lines in Legacy? Let's start with you, Jason. What do you think?
So I don't really think that. I think you're gonna have to look at sideboarding a little bit differently, but at the same time too, if you're looking in a format like Modern with Dredge, Dredge is always gonna get you game 1 with the new Mulligan system, right? But game 2, whenever you're sideboarding against Dredge, as a Dredge player, I know what people are trying to side in against me and looking for a ley line of the void and maybe a Nature's Claim or an Assassin's Trophy or something to take care of what I would need to take care of the ley line of the void. It's going to be a lot easier for the Dredge player too to get those sideboard cards. So overall, I don't think against certain decks, it's not going to matter a whole lot. I think the decks that are getting better with the Mulligan system, they're going to be able to find the answers for the sideboard cards just as easily as they're finding the sideboard cards to manage with your main deck, with your game plan. So in certain cases, I don't think it matters. I kind of think sideboarding is kind of like a wash. But going back to Standard, again, there's not a whole lot this is really affecting in Standard. And I don't think that Standard just seems kind of it's just not going to get affected much at all. Just every deck is just kind of going to get a little bump except for Nexus. But against Nexus, I think that it's going to help with I don't know. I don't see it affecting much in Standard. But in the more Eternal formats, you're definitely going to see the sideboards. You're going to be able to find your sideboard pieces equally in each deck. So the decks that are already getting better with the Mulligan rule, their sideboarding, finding their sideboard pieces is just as easy as the other decks.
I think, yeah. And when it comes, it feels like when I saw this ruling, and I think they really have best of ones, arena, and Standard in mind, and that's really where I think this Mulligan is suited for, is that limited environment where the card pool is going to stay smaller. So moving into Modern Legacy, Jay, do you think, now that we know what the degenerate options probably are going to be right out of the gate, what do you think is going to happen when it comes to sideboarding in game 2 and 3? Do you think there's going to be enough answers to actually counteract all those neat little tricks that are going to show up with this new Mulligan?
I actually couldn't agree more with Jason. That's exactly what's going to happen. Game one, the more linear deck, the more combo-oriented deck, by virtue of having a better chance at finding the pieces it needs, is more likely to win. Then come the sideboard games, both decks get to play the I need to find my answers game. Let's take the Dredge, for example, up against any white deck. I need to find my Rest in Peace. The Dredge deck, I need to find my Nature's Claim, Assassin Trophy, Abrupt Decay, whatever card they're looking for. They both get to play that game. So it does become a bit of a wash. As a result, the only thing that it does have to disproportionately benefit those linear engine decks. There is something that happens sometimes, more often in Legacy, which is the Aaron Campbell strategy. Aaron Campbell, for those that don't know, plays Dredge, is an aficionado, and has a rule. It goes something like, you just can't be afraid of all the answers they could bring in. You can't fear Rest in Peace. You have to just play through it, and if they have it, they have it. That becomes a much less viable strategy going forward. You have a better chance of being able to water down your deck because you have a better chance of finding the pieces to keep playing through anyway and finding the answers. Dredge is huge in every format because of this. Just take Modern Dredge, for instance. Narcomoebas are normally bad cards in your hand. But every time you take a mulligan, if you want to consider a Narcomoeba as a free card that just gets thrown down, that's kind of like a free mulligan. It didn't do much in your hand anyway. The same thing will apply in the older formats as well. God forbid if they unban Splinter Twin. Now you can find your two pieces a lot more readily.
Totally fair magic.
Unban Splinter Twin now. I'm sorry for starting that. I reset the clock on that once again.
Yeah, starting crap on Cackling Carnaruim. Yep.
One thing I would like to talk about regarding Pauper real quick, because Papa, you would know more about this than I would. I know that there are some decks like Tortured Existence, like Wineland Spy, that would probably benefit much more readily from something like this. And while there is, of course, graveyard hate in Pauper, we have our Spellbomb, we have Relic of Progenitus, those sorts of cards. There's nothing correct me if I'm wrong, there's no Rest in Peace, there's nothing that's that good. So these graveyard-based combo decks probably benefit a lot from it, don't they?
We are seeing some main board inclusions of Relic of Progenitus. And I think that's a very interesting addition, especially in the white or Boros Metalcraft decks, being able to play that. And if it works, great. If not, I can still pop it and draw a card. So that's a neat inclusion. But no, to your point, Jay, there is no major fear or comparison, although Tortured Existence and comparatively Dredge exists in Pauper as well. And that's a serious concern. What I see even beyond Pauper is the potential evolution of the rock, paper, scissors formulation of decks. When aggro decks pop up, we begin to see more mid-range or some control decks. And there's a pleasant circuitous balance between different archetypes with the ability to get more combos by digging through and finding pieces quickly. What does this do for the aggro matchup? How does it get stronger against combos before those combos come into play? Because we realize both, just use red, mono red for those playing Arena can sympathize seeing lots of red aggro. It's cheap, it's efficient, it's fast, and it puts the opponent on a very time sensitive clock. So will the combination pieces. So how do we match or protect against heavy aggro and heavy combo? Does the world become a blue world, with counterspells, 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 even at common. Yeah, that's the world in which I'm looking into and wondering what evolves from this. It might be easier just to say regarding sideboards and the archetypes and typical matchup expectations, look, while my opponent has the ability to draw into whatever they want, so do I. So at the end of the day, it's a net negative. Nobody really gains anything more beyond the information that you may have seen in the deck, which seeing 14 cards, that's a lot to be able to begin calculating. And those who are quick to discern math, to make on the spot calculations, especially those with more practice as such, those players become exceptionally more dangerous with that quick calculation advantage.
You said 14. Now, you're talking about like you don't like the top 7 and then you look at the next top 7, or my impression was you shuffle those 7 back in and draw another 7 for the mulligan.
True, but you are seeing a larger amount.
Okay, so you're seeing like you're getting a feed for you get to see 14 cards to decide what's going to work for you. If the first half doesn't work, you ship it and then you try again.
Yes.
And that's the ratio you're reeling with. Okay. So one of the things that, I also wonder about what's going to happen to average curve on a deck, like mana curves on the deck. Because for me, if you're talking about a deck that wants to dig for these specific pieces, the lower that curve is, the better the deck is going to be, especially if you're going to be doing cantrips that will help you draw into more cards. Like, I think there's a trap here when it comes to doing the mulligan, and the more skilled players are going to be able to figure out those calculations better. This is where there might be a pitfall for less experienced or newer players, where they're like, I need this card in my hand or else I can't win. And they mull, and suddenly they're down to 4 or 3 cards, and they were kind of like chasing the dragon, trying to get that like clutch card that they needed. But in the end, they weren't really kind of like considering that they need to have the right number of cards in their hands to make the rest of the deck function for them. So, what do you think it's going to do to? Do you think it's going to put a higher demand on lower costs and card draw in order to take advantage of these mulligans, or do you think the decks that are existing today will figure out a way to adapt without making major changes to their makeup? Jay?
All right, switchboard operator. Are we good?
Yep.
All right, is the jet still sounding?
No jet.
Okay, I'm trying. I'm doing what I can. All right, so there's two points I wanted to make real quick on this. The first one is I think that there's actually a counterpoint, or there's a counter to the argument that cost can go lower as a result. If you have a hand of 7 cards and it's your first mulligan, and you have 2 lands and a siege rhino, that siege rhino is something. I mean, normally if you just drew those 6 cards, it could be the siege rhino, but there's only a 1 in 7 chance it's the siege rhino that you wouldn't see yet. And even if it's not, it's going to be on top of your deck. Well, okay, you're going to scry, but okay, because of the scry, that messes that up a little bit. But you get to put that card on the bottom. You get to choose which card goes on the bottom. So it can actually incentivize you to be okay playing higher CMC cards, knowing that you're more likely to be able to get rid of them. This doesn't mean it can go up by a substantial amount, just a margin, but it can have an upward pressure in fair decks if you're playing this. On the other hand, there's a card, regardless of format, if it's allowed, that becomes much better under this new rule, and it's Thoughtseize. And obviously that's not in standard, but any sort of Thoughtseize effect. Because a counter to what we've been saying, or what a theme I should say for what we've been saying is, I'm going to use this mulligan to dig for specific pieces, and once I've found them, I'm good as gold, right? And then Thoughtseize comes in and ruins your day. Any sort of very cheap interaction like that can mess up combo decks in much the same way that it does now. And if the meta does become more combo centric, and I say combo, just any sort of deck, like we'll count decks like Infect that have a combo but don't have to win on it. Thoughtseize will become much more powerful against them. When it comes to those decks finding their sideboard answers to beat your sideboard answers, again, Thoughtseize gets to take care of them. One reason why Dredge stands a better chance than a lot of decks is because Dredge is one of the more Thoughtseize-proof decks in any format. So that proves yet another counter to me, yet another reason why Dredge is potentially bonkers under this. Now granted, Thoughtseize is probably a card that's never coming back into Standard again. It's been tried a couple times, and while I like the card, I am very much an exception. That is not what most people think. It's not terribly fun to play against, and it's so consistent at making your opponent inconsistent. So that's probably not something we're going to see in Standard going forward. Instead, we have all of these Thoughtseize light effects or selective Thoughtseize effects. Duress being the prime example of it. I'm going to be able to take, whatever works well against control, works against a lot of the mid-range removal spells. A lot of sideboard answers are not going to be creatures. Duress is good for those. And then you have these take a creature or artifact, take a creature or planeswalker, da-da-da-da-da, those sort of selective Thoughtseize effects. But those do get better under this because you have a new way to be disruptive.
And I think when it came to Thoughtseize, the biggest issue wasn't whether or not you liked it or hated it. It flat out warped whatever format it was playing in Standard. So kind of dovetailing off of that, we'll go over to Jason. As far as like Thoughtseize style effects as with Standard, what do you think is going to be? Do you think Hand Hate will find some new life with this kind of mulligan?
I think if you're going for more like against a combo-ish deck, like I think Standard's at a very healthy point right now. Like you're not going to see a lot of like combo style decks other than like the Nexus deck. And Thought Erasure is a main boardable card in like the black and blue decks. And like I think that you're going to see that more in the main boards if Nexus does get better. Because it does, Thought Erasure could take a Nexus out of their hand, but it's just going to go back in their deck anyway. Where they're really getting the combo going is with Wilderness Reclamation. And Thought Erasure takes care of the Wilderness Reclamation. It gets that out of their hand. So, like, I think Thought Erasure gets a little bit better. And, like, I think the decks that can afford to play it, like the Sultai decks, will definitely have it in the main board. Definitely in best of one on Arena. But, like, if Nexus gets out of control with it, with the new Mulligan system, I think that you're going to see more Thought Erasures in the main board of even, like, the mid-range Sultai decks or the mid-range, like, you might even try to splash blue for just that or Krasis in other decks like Teamer, like a green-red style deck. You might go Teamer for those cards, you know what I mean? But, like, overall, like I think to go back on your point of like the mana curve and whatnot, I think that you can have like mono red could theoretically play Rekindling Phoenix now. Like I know some decks mono red are playing Rekindling Phoenix because if they get that in their opening hand, they can't cast it. They can just put it on the bottom of their library. Like they can keep their lower mana creatures and just tuck away their higher mana creatures, you know what I mean? Like you get to sculpt your hand, so like it's not much of a liability to have a Rekindling Phoenix now because you can just throw it away if you don't need it, or if you have the mana for it, you can keep it. I did want to touch on one card that I forgot to touch on earlier in Standard. Sphinx of the Foresight gets much better with the new Mulligan system because you have 7 chances to see it on a multi-6. You see it, you keep it, and then you can just scry your first 3. You could sculpt your first 3 draws. That card is insane, and it's not seeing enough play.
I'm waiting for that card to just be busted out, whatever format it shows up in. That to be able to. I saw that they'll just scry 3 on your opening. It's like, oh, that sounds so nice. But
Yeah.
what is it? It's a 4/4 for 4 CMC, right?
Yeah, it's a 4/4 for I think it's 2 blue and 2 other. If it's in your opening hand, you get to scry 3 on your first turn. So it's even better on the draw because you get to see what your opponent's doing first before you decide what you're keeping on the top.
So yeah, that card will, yeah, I can see that getting a little bit more busted when it comes to this new format.
What's
So,
really fun is having 2 of those in your opening hand. You can just scry 6. Like,
oh,
no big deal. No big deal.
I'm gonna have 4 of the Sphinxes in my hand, and I'm gonna scry through half my deck. So, Pappy, let's get over to you and talk about this Thoughtseize concept. Not that you have Thoughtseize in Pauper, but when you have hand hate in a format like Pauper, and then you mix it in with this Mulligan style, do you think a hand hate deck would be? And I'm bringing up hand hate because one of the things in the earliest days of Magic the Gathering, we had Ponza, which was a viable deck where you had sinkholes and you had a lot of these lower casting cost actual land destruction decks that would wreck someone's day, and it became a negative play experience. Same thing with hand hate. We didn't get our Hymns to Torak back after Fallen Empires because that was actually pretty busted, and the low cost hand hate got a lot more stipulation as to what you could use. So when we move on over to Pauper, what do you think about a hand hate strategy gaining more traction with this Mulligan system?
Well, look at, and you mentioned it too, it's going to typically be a mono black control shell that's pushing the hand hate. And for the time that this would take to finally come into play should be hopefully right around the time that we see Oubliette come back, marry up Oubliette with mono black hand disruption, and now we have potentially a very viable deck that can go long with either the Metalcraft Vampires or Gary, the Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Those give us the high-end options. Even the Ninjutsu Rats could come into play because of the further propensity to force an opponent to discard. So while we may not have a Thoughtseize, we certainly have many things for which we can look forward in the future. Oubliette being one of the biggest ones, and would be a prime time to reintroduce and get those thoughts and cards out of an opponent's hands. I'm also seeing more options in Pauper. We're seeing more cards with modal-like spells that gives versatility, gives more choice to the players, and this new Mulligan system does just that. It allows the player to make some of the most important decisions before they play their first card. So those are some of my thoughts. Jason, you made an interesting point, and this was the one thing I had written down that I don't think anybody else was going to touch. But I don't think we can ignore the past by looking at what Richard Garfield has done and looking to the future at the same time. Note that the popularity of Keyforge does not require the use of mana. That's one of its biggest draws from other players who enjoy playing Magic the Gathering. It's a new game by Garfield, Fantasy Flight Games. People can play their decks without needing to worry about mana. Interestingly enough, shortly thereafter, now we have a new Mulligan system that allows players to not worry about their mana. They're able to plan out what cards they're going to play and what sequences. I don't think we should ignore, and I certainly don't believe Wizards of the Coast has ignored, the sales of Keyforge influencing the market and encouraging other players to play a very quick, very fast, even combination heavy decks.
That is a factor that I had not been really aware of. I've heard of Keyforge. I did not realize it was a Garfield game. That is an interesting idea that it is starting to siphon off Magic players. Now that I've kind of understanding that, now I need to take a more closer look at that, which does bring us up to another point. Like, what do we think the other outs? What do we'll go to Jason and then Jay. What kind of outside factors do you think were driving this decision by Wizards of the Coast to even experiment with this Mulligan rule, other than maybe trying to net more positive play experience for players, or make coverage that's an irony, but make even just arena coverage worth watching better? I don't know, like doing something to make the game move along faster. Like, do you think there were outside influences? We'll go to Jason. What do you think it was, if there were any?
So I think that the main reason why they're going to try this, because they tried this whenever they were doing the Vancouver Mulligan rule. Whenever they implemented that, they also tried this, and they thought it was a little too far. Like, it was a little too much. So that's why they brought in the Vancouver Mulligan system with the scry. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to create more actual games of Magic. Like, if from a play design standpoint, it really sucks for new players coming in and they can't play Magic because they have a no land hand, and here's all lands on my 6. On my 5, I have 1 land, and here I'm at 4 cards. So like it's allowing for less non-games of Magic, the new Mulligan system, and it's also going to cut down your multi-4s. Because, like, even if you get down to a multi-5, you're still looking at 7 cards. You're more than likely going to be able to find a nice 5-card hand out of there. So I think it's going to cut down on the need to mull down, like, to 4 or 3 or whatever. I think that ultimately they're just trying to push a better gameplay experience for newer players, and even like a lot of us, we just like, whenever we get screwed like that, we're just like, well, that's Magic. What can you do? Like, but the newer players don't get that, So I think to try to make their experience better, this is definitely a step in the right direction. I think that was a big reason why they did it.
How about you? And Jay, what do you think? Do you think how do you feel about the concept of other outside factors, like what Pappy Pauper's talking about with the Keyforge influence possibly drawing players away from Magic? Do you think Wizards is looking at these outside elements to consider trying to keep players engaged in the game with an easier opening hand?
I hadn't considered Keyforge. It's not something that I've looked too much into, but that makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. My background before Magic includes another game that does not have mana in it. You may have heard of it. It's a small game called Yu-Gi-Oh! It's a game where no mulligans exist, though. So people think of that as being a very degenerate game, turn 1 combos and da-da-da-da-da. You get fewer cards in your opening hand and no mulligans. It keeps itself in check to a good extent. For Keyforge to not have mana and to work, I actually don't know this. Maybe you could inform me. Does it work pretty much like Magic in terms of resource management, notwithstanding there not being mana? It's not like a Hearthstone, you build something over time, or...
I'll try to make it short and brief. Imagine having a Magic the Gathering deck that includes 3 colors. On your turn, let's say you have a Bant deck. On your turn, you call out green. Every green card you have, you can play. But you can't play any blue, and you can't play any white that turn. Next, then you draw up to 6 cards to end your turn. Next turn, if I had, let's say, the elves that I called out when I had green, I got to call out green again if I want to attack with those elves, which are green. And I also have the option to discard, and when I'm calling out green, or let's say using Keyforge terminology, Sanctum, the House of Knights. I have a bunch of Sanctum cards, but no real want or need to play any more Knights. I can pitch all of my Sanctum cards. If I have too much of anything, I can say, I'm going to call this house, and Magic call out that color, and pitch them. End of the turn, draw up to 6. and you don't deck yourself when you have no more cards in your library, you shuffle your discard into your deck. So there, it's very fast paced, and it's again trying to manage your resources. Life racing, life totals isn't so much of an issue. Imagine if each creature was like a Llanowar elf that could tap for green mana. In this case, in Keyforge, you're collecting amber. Once you have collected 18 amber, you've won the game. So there's that kind of resource management.
Okay. Wow. That sounds actually kind of interesting. Oh, that
Well,
sounds
if you
cool.
got a chance, hit up Fantasy Flight Games. If you followed me on Twitter, you'll see that they're very active. They've liked a lot of stuff. They've retweeted stuff. Given some inside looks. Very, very active, engaging with the community, and that is something that is kind of setting them apart for just a young game. I think they hit 500,000 unique registered decks in about 2 months.
Oh, wow.
Going potato.
Everything okay?
I can't see you, Johnny. Hello, hello. Hey, there you are.
I'm the one that went potato. Okay.
It
That
wasn't
was
me
all
this
me.
time. Finally, it wasn't me. To get back to your original question, Johnny, I'm going to echo. Oh yeah, I'm going to echo a point that Patrick Chapin not Patrick Chapin, Patrick Sullivan.
I think it was Sullivan.
I'm sorry, Sully. Did I say Patrick Chapin earlier?
You did, and I went looking at
I'm
the same
having
article.
a great day today. I'm on a roll. I'm just going to be Tommy Wiseau for the rest of this. Thank you. All right, so because we started this off talking a lot about how it doesn't seem, Jason, to echo you, the Mulligan change doesn't seem to affect Standard nearly as strongly as it does the Eternal formats, or especially Modern, Legacy, Vintage. You can see Standard on Arena. You can see Pauper. You can see a lot of formats making their way on Arena. You can't really see Legacy show up on Arena. I can't anyway. I can't imagine something like that being the case. And so if the focus is MTG Arena, then the other formats can take a bit of a backseat. And not necessarily Arena as if that's the be-all, end-all. Arena and Paper Standard, the things that make them the most money right now. I wouldn't imagine Wizards makes a lot of money on Legacy. And if they're not making Modern Master Sets anymore, not as much on Modern, but Standard is, of course, where they get a lot of that from. So if the focus has to be on the things that make them the most money, they're a company. They're going to make some money.
I think when it comes to as far as like Modern, I think would be the only Eternal format they would really put any focus on, even if you don't look at Modern Master Sets or any Master Sets. We're done with Master Sets. Well, let's scroll the clock back to last spring. We had Battle Bond just kind of low under the radar just show up and turn out to be one of the best sets you could get for, say, Commander, because there's all kinds of goodies in there, both reprint and new. And that fed right into the Eternal form, fed into Commander at the very least. But I think we're still going to see something that feeds into some of the older formats. You've got the guild kits that are coming out for this particular set, the last two sets. But I don't think they're going to, I don't know, if they can make some money on a sealed product when it comes to Modern players, they'll put something out. It won't be called a master set, but they'll put something out. And when it comes to, I think when it comes to, I just going to the other thing that to consider when it comes to outside influences, I wouldn't be surprised if they are looking at Keyforge and kind of taking a note and keeping an eye on the numbers. But, tonight I was talking with some friends down at the LGS, and we were talking about, like, I mentioned, like, anybody still playing Hearthstone and, like, who's playing Arena and that kind of stuff. And the guys are like, the people I'm playing with are like, Hearthstone's dead. Like, they're saying Hearthstone is, if you've got a PC, there's no point in playing Hearthstone anymore. And as soon as Wizards, I think that might have been why Wizards kind of lumbered along the way they did, dragging Arena out to this point, like taking as long as they got here, Wizards of the Coast, they must have known. It's like, okay, Hearthstone, you have fun. Yeah, Hearthstone money. That's good on you. Good on you. Here comes Magic. Boom. And it's done. Like, and people who left Mitgo to go play Hearthstone came right back to Arena. So I'm sure they're not terribly worried about Keyforge right now, but they're probably watching it because it is a Garfield game. And when Garfield makes something that hits with Magic players, oof, watch out. Because I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, for the way you're describing it, that's. I'm not one for playing multiple games because I don't have the time and the resources to actually buy multiple games at a time. But that sounds interesting. Like if Keyforge might be something I have to look at too. So Wizards does need
that more. I mean, $10 for a deck, and the only drawback is it's non-customizable. It's algorithmically driven. To be, consistency in some ways, but that's it. An initial purchase of $10. It's kind of like the original limited format. Here's your deck. Open it up. Have fun. That's it.
And Fantasy Flight has a knack for taking a game, something like Legend of the Five Rings, and turning it into a living card game.
Mm-hmm.
So there's also that factor. I've had discussions with some card store owner friends who one of them is very adamant if Fantasy Flight got their hands on Magic and turned it into a living card game, that could change everything. Like make the game hyper affordable, get millions of people into the game. Whether or not that's as relevant now with the fact that Arena is being as successful as it is. But even for me, like the reasons I stopped playing Hearthstone, whenever I stopped playing Hearthstone, it's like I got in twice and got out twice. It got boring. And I'm not putting a lot of money into Arena because I don't want to spend money on a digital thing that doesn't actually translate to me owning a thing. So I'm getting to that same point where Arena is like, oh, well, here's Arena. The same boredom was showing up for me that it was for Hearthstone. So I think that's something else. Now I'm meandering and rambling here. So why don't we have some closing thoughts here? We're coming up. Yep, we're at about 10 o'clock hour. So even with delays, we're about an hour here. So we'll go around the bend. We'll start with Jason. What are your closing thoughts on this Mulligan rule? Do you think it'll get past London, or do you think Modern's going to show us that it is broken and definitely can't go past the testing stage?
So with London being Modern, this is our best shot at seeing what it's going to do for the older formats. But if Wizards is mainly focused on Arena and Standard, I really think that this Mulligan rule is going to pass. I think it's great for those formats. And I kind of feel like Wizards is just saying, like, okay, Modern, Legacy, you go do what you want to do. Like, we don't care right now. We got our cash cow in Arena and Standard, and that's their focus. I think that the Mulligan rule will pass.
And Jay, what do you think?
I think that the most important thing, and we haven't talked about it yet somehow, is that you now can more consistently get your turn 1 Glistener Elves in every format. And that's the most important part of this. No. I think that it disproportionately helps in any format, but especially older formats, linear, combo, and combo engine-based decks, and decks that are best at stripping those away, Thoughtseize decks. Using sideboards to counter this isn't as effective because those decks will also be able to find their sideboard cards more readily. And vintage dredge, woo!
All right,
Turn
Pappy.
1 Glistener Elf, I have to represent.
I know it's rough when they're never going to print copies 5 through 8 of the card you need.
I know.
Yeah,
I mean,
my Legacy deck if I ever play Legacy, I've got the basic components for an Infect deck. That would have to be the way I go, and I feel the pain. It's like, yep, you need the Glistener, or that's it. All right, Pappy, closing thoughts on whether or not you think this gets past the testing stage in MF London. Oh, Sam Jackson.
Look what Rosewater said in the past. Wizards is slow and resistant to ever admit they made a mistake. So for them to roll it out, there's no going back. This will be successful, and it's going to require the fans to be vigilant and point out different combinations and counter strategies for the use of the Mulligan. but I think it's going to be here to stay. I wrote the notes, and I think we've checked off everything. There's going to be talks about potential bans and other non-standard formats. That it's going to build a community by inviting new players with fewer frustrations over mana situations. And I talked about the one thing that I anticipated nobody else would, how Keyforge would influence that market, and the idea of mulliganing and having some stuff. But yeah, it's going to be here to stay. And I'm really happy to have spent my evening with all of you. Thank you.
All right. And for me, the mulligan rule, I don't know. If it makes it, we'll see how it goes in EDH. But I think they call it a test. I'll say it's just beta testing right now. And when I see them actually enact it for the future, anything in the future, I'll believe it. You know, I know that when they did the Vancouver, it was kind of, I guess it was kind of like the similar setup. But going down to 6 and scrying does seem a little less broken. Even still, I do like it. I think if it goes through, I'll make it work and hope for the best, and then we'll have another season of bannings to fix all the broken cards. So there it is. That's a Cackling Carnaruim, and random whenever I happen to do this. This was the Consortium of content creators getting together and talking about the mulligan rule. So we'll just do quick outros. Gentlemen, you can tell us where to find you once again. Jason, where can we find you?
All right, you can find me on the Ether Hub on YouTube, and also you can find me on Twitter and follow me there at T2TKS.
And Jay, where do we find you?
I am on YouTube. I'm T1 Glistener Elf. Just search that. And I'm on Twitter at T1 Glistener Elf. And just FYI, T1 Glistener Elf on MTGO is a fraud. That is not me. I don't know who that is, but that is not me.
The imposters. All right, Pappy, where do we find you?
Pretty simple. It is Pappy Pauper. And it seems to be that if you guys want to continue on conversations about my favorite format or more about Keyforge, Twitter at Pappy Pauper is a great way to get in touch. And my DMs are always open there. Again, thank you.
And I am John, also known on the internet as Johnny Slivers. You can find me on Twitter at Johnny Slivers. I'm also here on this channel sporadically, periodically. You can also find me at cardsphere.com. I do some blog posting for their EDH column. And you can find me at 10th Street Hooligans on They Said We Said with John Dunning and the rest of the Hooligans crew. Magic with Zuby, Coach from the Card Bazaar, and as special guests when we bring them in, which is pretty much our thing. I've said it before, and I'll say it now. I think I can, yes, well, 10th Street will probably end up being like the Wu-Tang of nerddom. So that's my hot take on that. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining me tonight. Thank you, chat, for showing up. And until next time, everybody have a great day, and may your top decks be epic. Good night.
Right.